Look around. Your books, paper, desks, doors, spices, coffee, tea, rubber, even chocolates. So much comes from forests. Forests give us wood, bamboo, fuel, fruits, animals, medicines, and thousands of plant species. But this abundance did not last. Between 1700 and 1995, nearly 14 million square kilometers of forest vanished. Deforestation is the disappearance of forests. It began long ago, but under colonial rule it became systematic. The British saw forests as wilderness, useless land that should be cultivated for revenue. As population rose, cultivation expanded. Between 1880 and 1920, cultivated area grew by 6.7 million hectares. Progress for some, but at the cost of clearing forests. In England, oak forests were disappearing. Timber was vital for ships and for imperial power. Soon, Indian forests became their target. But after the 1850s, railways created an even greater demand. Locomotives needed fuel, and railway tracks needed sleepers. Each mile of track required nearly 2,000 sleepers. By 1890, 25,500 kilometers of tracks were laid, and forests across India were cut down to meet this demand. Large areas of natural forests were cleared for tea, coffee, and rubber plantations. The colonial government gave vast lands to European planters at cheap rates. These plantations were enclosed, forests were destroyed, and monoculture crops replaced centuries of biodiversity. Forests now served the needs of Europe, not the people of India. Colonial rule transformed India's forests, from vibrant ecosystems into resources for ships, railways, and plantations. What they saw as progress came at the cost of diversity, balance, and the lives of countless communities dependent on the forests. To protect timber for ships and railways, the British tightened their control over India's forests. They invited a German expert, Dietrich Brandis, who became the first Inspector General of Forests in 1864. Under him, the Indian Forest Service was born, and strict forest laws soon followed. Brandis introduced what was called scientific forestry. Natural forests with diverse species were cut down and replaced with single-species plantations like teak and sal. Forests were divided into reserved, protected, and village forests. The best lands became reserved forests, completely off-limits for villagers. For local people, this was devastating. Their everyday practices, cutting wood, grazing cattle, collecting roots, fruits, and herbs, suddenly became crimes. Women who collected firewood now lived in fear of forest guards. Villagers had to bribe officials or face harassment. What was once a right became an offense. The British also banned shifting cultivation, a traditional method where plots were cleared, farmed for a few years, and then left to regenerate. To foresters, it was wasteful and dangerous for timber, but for many communities it was life. With the ban, entire villages were displaced, livelihoods destroyed, and rebellions began. Even hunting was taken away from forest dwellers. While locals were punished as poachers, British officials and Indian princes hunted for sport. Between 1875 and 1925, over 80,000 tigers and nearly 200,000 wolves were killed. What was once tradition for survival became destruction for pleasure. Some communities turned to new trades, collecting rubber, gums, ivory, or working on tea plantations in Assam. But these jobs brought little relief. Wages were low, conditions harsh, and many workers never returned to their homes. For countless communities, colonial forestry meant not opportunity, but loss. Commercial forestry under the British was not about conservation. It was about control of land, resources, and people. What they called scientific forestry stripped forests of diversity and stripped communities of their rights. In the forests of Bastar, in present-day Chhattisgarh, people lived in harmony with nature. Communities like the Maria and Muria Gonds, Durwas, Batras and Halbas respected the earth, the rivers, and the forests. Each village protected its land, shared resources, and even held annual hunts and councils to discuss forest matters. But in 1905, the British proposed to reserve 2/3 of Bastar's forests. Shifting cultivation, hunting, and gathering forest produce were banned. Some villagers were forced into unpaid labor for the forest department, while others were evicted without compensation. Already burdened by famines and heavy rents, this was the final blow. The people began to gather in councils and bazaars. Messages of rebellion spread in the form of mango boughs, a lump of earth, chilies, and arrows. Though there was no single leader, Gunda Dur of village Nethanar became a central figure. In 1910, the forests of Bastar rose in revolt. Bazaars were looted, schools, police stations and houses of officials were burnt. Grain was taken and shared among the poor. The anger of the people was directed at everything that represented the colonial state and its oppressive forest laws. The British sent in troops. They surrounded rebel camps and opened fire. Villages were flogged, homes destroyed, and people fled deep into the jungles. For 3 months, the forests echoed with resistance. Yet, Gunda Dur was never captured. In the end, the British were forced to scale back their forest reservations by half, a partial victory for the people of Bastar. Their struggle did not end in 1910. Even after independence, new battles were fought against industrial projects. The rebellion of Bastar remains a reminder that forest communities have always fought to defend their land, their rights, and their way of life. Today, Java is known as the Rice Bowl of Indonesia, but centuries ago, it was covered in dense forests. Like in India, colonial rulers here too reshaped people's lives and forests forever. The Dutch wanted teak, strong, durable wood, to build their ships and expand their empire. The Kalangs of Java were skilled woodcutters and shifting cultivators. So valuable were they, that when the Mataram kingdom split in 1755, 6,000 Kalang families were divided equally between the two rulers. But when the Dutch took control, they tried to force the Kalangs into their service. In 1770, the Kalangs rose in revolt, attacking a Dutch fort at Joanna, but their resistance was crushed. In the 19th century, the Dutch introduced strict forest laws. Villagers could no longer freely graze cattle, cut wood, or even travel on forest roads without permits. To supply timber for railways and ships, the Dutch created a forest service. Labor was needed, so villagers were forced into the Blandongdiensten system, working without pay in exchange for rent exemptions or later meager wages. But their right to cultivate forest land was slowly taken away. The state did not create the wind, the water, the earth or the wood, so how can it own them? In the 1890s, a villager named Surontiko Samin questioned Dutch authority. His words inspired thousands. By 1907, nearly 3,000 families had joined his movement, refusing to pay taxes, perform labor, or give up their land. The Samanists resisted not with weapons, but with defiance. The world wars brought new destruction. The Dutch, fearing Japanese invasion, burned huge teak stocks. When Japan occupied Java, they ruthlessly cut forests for war industries, forcing villagers into labor. Many villagers seized the moment to expand cultivation. Land the Forest Department could never fully reclaim after the war. By the late 20th century, governments realized that keeping people out of forests only created conflict. Across Asia and Africa, a new approach emerged: conservation through community. From India's sacred groves to Java's villages, it is the people who live closest to the forests who are now seen as their best guardians.